want to remind everyone that celebration of being Filipino does not end here today. We got to carry that everywhere we go. We got to carry that throughout the year.
Spark, Connect, and Empower is a movement born in San Francisco to engender love and passion for Filipino heritage and culture among Filipino Americans. In the process, connecting them and empowering them as individuals and collectively as a community.
Pinoy ako! Proud ako! Pinoy ako! Proud ako! Pinoy ako! Proud ako! Pinoy ako! Proud ako! Spark, connect, empower, Pinoy 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 ako! Listen, Phil, I'm to the next generation. Millennials, you are the future of the nation. Embrace your past, be proud of who you are. Spark, ignite your pride and curiosity. Connect with one another and with your ancestry. Empower, be the forefront of the community. Be proud of who you are. Pinay ako, taas noo, ang mamalaki ko sa buong mundo. Pinoy ako, I'm proud ako. I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be a Pinoy. Pinoy ako, proud ako. Be proud of your race and your identity. Be bankers of your culture and heritage, you'll see. Come and belong, stand tall, then you'll know. It's fun, oh so fun to be a Filipino. But diverse, we are many but united. Be proud, shout it out and show we're not divided. Behold the Filipino spirit that's in you. Pinay ako, taas noo, mamalaki ko sa buong mundo. Pinoy ako, at proud ako. I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be a Pinoy. Pinoy ako, proud ako. All it takes is a spark to connect and empower nation building beyond the borders. Come and celebrate who we are. Pinay ako, taas noo, pagmamalaki ko sa buong mundo. Pinoy ako, at proud ako. I'm proud to be who I am. Yes! Pinay ako, taas noo, pagmamalaki ko sa buong mundo. Pinoy ako, at proud ako. I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be a Pinoy. I'm proud to be who I am. Yes, I'm proud. I'm proud to be who I am. So proud. I'm proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be a Pinoy. Pinoy ako! Proud ako!
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat, mga kababayan, and for other kababayans who are in other parts of the world. Saan man po kayo naroon, magandang gabi or magandang hapon. Welcome po sa ating programa, TNC or Tanong ni CONGEN. And we've been into the pandemic for many weeks already. And unfortunately, we're not able to do things in person. But on the other hand, we're also able to do the things using virtual platforms, digital platforms. And so from that perspective, we're able to reach as many people as possible. And so for today, we're able to discuss important issues that are still concerns us on a day-to-day basis. And so we're able to come together today, and we have a very important guest from a very important organization here, and their advocacy is not just limited to people here in the United States, but to people and Filipinos outside of the United States, back in the archipelago, and in other parts as well. And so for today, a very important partner of our Spark Connect Empower movement, we call ALLICE, which is very critical also in the empowerment of the community, of the Filipino American community, but really the entire community, the larger community, because of their advocacy. I remember when we started this Tanong ni CONGEN, among the very first guests that we have is also from ALLICE. And we're very happy to have them back again because of the importance of the issue and also the practicality of what their advocacy is. No? And so we're very glad to have for today our guest from ALLICE, Ms. Cherie Querol Moreno, who is also a journalist, actually a journalist by profession, and she's serving in ALLICE in a voluntary capacity because of her belief. No? She's the executive director, in fact, of the Philippine News Today and correspondent and contributor in many media outfits such as Inquirer.net, Positively Filipino, Rappler, and GMA News Online. She obviously is online today with ALLICE Secretary Mr. Anastasio Jr. Flores, who is also the program director at Asian American Recovery Services Agency Health Right 360. Maybe he will explain that as well later. So, magandang umaga. Good morning, Cherie and Junior, if I may call you at that. So we're here to obviously discuss the advocacy, but please greet our viewers, Cherie.
Thank you, Congen. Good morning po sa inyong lahat, wherever you are, ating mga kababayan. It's such an honor to be here today with our Consul General. Actually, the Philippine Consulate has been a founding partner of ALLICE. And so every time we get together, it's an anniversary. So happy anniversary to us, CONGEN and the Consulate. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Cherie. Junior, would you like to greet our viewers?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you for having us. And thank you, Cherie, for inviting me to join you and be a part of ALLICE and continue to work, the wonderful work that's been happening for a long time. So.
Thank you, Junior. I noticed Junior called you Cherie. I kept calling you Cherie.
Okay.
So I will try to do Junior's Cherie. Okay. So maybe for a start, Cherie, can you give us a background essentially of what ALLICE is all about?
Thank you. I'd love to, CONGEN. ALLICE is actually the acronym for Alliance for Community Empowerment, and we are a private nonprofit. We are non-political. We are non-religious. We're secular. We are all volunteers. I did say that, right? And we were born 17 years ago while I was with Querol Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse, which is the only agency in San Mateo County that provides services to people who are mostly to survivors of domestic violence and their loved ones. And ALLICE came to be because one day when I was at Querol working as community outreach coordinator, I attended my first vigil for somebody who died in the hands of her her former intimate partner. And this was Claire Joyce Tempongco. The vigil was held at the steps of San Francisco City Hall, and there were about 200 people there, and I was probably one of 5 Filipinos present. So I wondered to myself why there were so few of us when Claire Joyce is Filipino American, and her story had been written about in Philippine News, in my own newspaper. So to me, that I recognize the need to educate Filipinos so that they understand that this is an issue that affects everybody. Filipinos can become, just like everybody else, can become entangled in abusive relationships, especially if they don't understand how it happens. And so I made it my mission first, my dream to get people together, and I was so happy to find out that there were people that shared it. So that's the short version of the
Wow,
story of
wow.
Alice.
Good to know that. But I notice you call, maybe you can explain, junior, people call compares and comares. What are those terms exactly as you use them in the context of allies?
Good question. Junior, do you want to answer that?
I mean, I could give you my version. I mean, I think, but
You're both of yours. So.
but I think I'm definitely getting the gist of it even more so. I know what it means in our language, but I think in our group in Alice Comares Compares, I've been with them now for what, almost 4 years. Um, and really just the relationships and the bonding that's occurred during that time, during our meetings, our events, and other interactions, that we're becoming like Kumaris Kumpares. You know, like my relationship with my daughter's godparent is almost very similar to what I have with Cherie and other members. So I think that's, I don't know if they kind of meant to do that, but I think it's just really amazing to where the group of women and men are becoming, you know, because of the topic that we discuss and talk about. There's a lot of bonding that happens during our meetings and our events. So I think that's, yeah, Kumar's Kumpare is really fit.
Right. Well, kumare is the term. Literally, it means fellow mother, di ba? Comadre, or in Spanish it's comadre. In Tagalog, it's kumare, Kumare. And a kumare is somebody that you trust. A kumare is a confidant. And so somebody that you would run to when you are in trouble, when there is something that's bothering you. And kumpare, of course, is the male version of that. And so that's what we want to be to the community. Anybody who has a question about their relationship and where they can get help, we want it to be the trusted entity that they would come to. So the name Kumare, Kumpare.
Okay, so in a sense, there's that term of intimacy. No? So when you
Yes, definitely.
part, it's not, it's not robotic.
Not at all.
But
No, it
very-
takes a lot of work.
That's right, and a lot of trust that comes with it. I suppose
Indeed.
confidence, no? As true friends,
Mhm.
the bond. That's very nice to know. Okay, going back, why then do you think you have to form Alice? Why do you have to form? Is there really a need to form an organization like Alice against domestic and family abuse? Do you think it is necessary to organize yourselves and to have an organization for this purpose? Your thoughts on this, Cherie?
Yeah, just like anything else, just like any issue that needs to be addressed, Congen, it was important to do this. I have been around for a long time. I've been around since the 80s, and I've been to a lot of events. I know what organizations there are in the community, especially the Filipino community. And they talk about empowerment, which is good, which is fabulous, but there seemed to be a missing angle, which is the women's issues. And so we talk about women, how women can get up in the corporate life, but before they can even have entertain the ambition to be CEOs of companies, kailangan feeling empowered muna sila sa kanilang buhay, sa kanilang personal lives. If they are at home and they don't even feel empowered at home, how can they even consider becoming somebody, an executive in the workplace, hindi ba? So we felt that, my cohorts and I felt that we need to go out there and reach out to the community and let them know that there is this group that can help them figure out how to engage each other and promote healthy interaction first at home, because that's where everything begins, at home. So, and not one person can do it alone, right? And so ALLICE is composed, right? Every year there's always transitions. There are people who move on, people who stay, but we're a diverse group of people. So we have therapists, of course. We have, Dr. J. Africa was your guest. Dr. J. Africa is our clinical director. Dr. J and I work together in Cora. And then we have Bettina Santos Yap, who's our founding president, and she is a marketing expert. We have elected officials. We have Joanne Del Rosario, who has been mayor of Colma for a number of years. We have Flor Nicolas, who is the first Filipino-American woman elected in South San Francisco. And then we have grandmothers. I'm a grandmother. We have grandmothers. We have millennials. We have Generation X, like Junior. We have males. So we have different perspectives, and the idea really is to make sure that whatever it is that we understand as domestic violence is correct, right? That it's founded on facts, on research. And so we all agree in our philosophy. We may differ in how we reach out to our particular groups, but we're an organization of several organizations. It's what we are. And for us, that's the most effective way to get the word out. Actually, Congen, 1 in 3 women have or will experience intimate partner abuse. That's statistically proven in this country. So we do have some survivors in ALLICE, but not everyone in ALLICE has identified as a survivor. I think I should say that. And the survivors who are in our group joined us after hearing the story. So the power of the testimony that is presented at our events is just incredible. And so we know that what we say is correct, because it really comes from the experience that the members who are survivors share with us. And that is why at every event, which is every October, we have a survivor speaking about the experience. And then people who are listening come to us, surprisingly, and say, thank you for saying this, because I didn't realize that this is happening to me. People don't understand, don't hear it. And so they can't figure out what's going on in their relationship at home when they're actually experiencing the dynamics of abuse. Wow. So it is happening, but there are different forms of abuse, which leads to confusion and misunderstanding of what it is. And that's what we'd like to present out there, which are the forms of healthy relationships as opposed to unhealthy and potentially abusive and abusive relationships.
Cherie, is it possible for a person maybe for nag-aabuso na siya pero hindi niya alam na abuso na pala yung ginagawa niya. Nakakasakit na pala siya pero hindi niya alam na nakakasakit na siya. And therefore, in that respect, there's a need for him to be conscious that certain things are not right to do, and it already constitutes an abuse. Does abuse need to be physical, or abuse can also be manifested in some other forms, which is more tricky than Obviously, physical violence is very clear to detect as violence per se. But is there also an abuse or a violence that is not physical and it's very tricky to detect it? Can you tell us some more of that? Maybe Cherie and then Junior, I'll ask both of you on this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Congen. Actually, why don't we define intimate partner abuse or abuse in general? So abuse is is a pattern, meaning it repeats itself. It's not a one-time thing. It's repetitive. It's a pattern of behavior where one takes power and control over the other. So my definition was specifically for intimate partner abuse because for one partner taking power and control and dominating the other. And so there are many different forms. There are many different attacks. So that would be emotional, constant put downs. Ang pangit-pangit mo kasi, bakit ko ba ikaw pinakasalan, right? Your English, your accent is so gross, you know? Or they say, you're so dumb, tatanga-tanga ka kasi, kaya ganyan, over and over until you internalize it and you think, I am worthless, I am of no value. Or somebody might say, if you don't, there are constant threats. So there's the emotional, psychological abuse, the constant put downs of who you are. And then there's the financial abuse that you cannot have your own bank account, for example, and which is not your choice. So the perpetrator takes the choice away from you. Okay, thinking, we're talking about unknowingly, you're saying. So thinking that it's the man's, or it's whether you're a man or a woman, but you are abusive, that it's your entitlement, that you're entitled to be the one holding the money. Why? Because I don't know, maybe because I am better at math. But it has to be a decision made by the both of you. It has to be an agreement for it to be a healthy kind of relationship where a certain part of where the budget, for example, or the financial aspect of the relationship is attended to by one party. So taking power and control, not giving the other partner the right or the privilege to enjoy whatever it is you're enjoying as well. So it doesn't always look sad. It always doesn't look like a relationship where there's a heated argument. It takes many forms. One of it is also sexual. There are sexual manifestations that or activities that you don't think is something that you think is objectionable, and yet you're forced to do it. That's a form of abuse. The other party might think, well, it's kinky, it's cute, I like it, and you're married to me, and so you have to do it. So it may not sound like abuse, it may sound unhealthy first, and then it becomes abusive, and the other person starts getting sad because she or he is being forced to perform acts that they find objectionable. Do you want to add to those other forms that may not be discerned as abuse?
You cover most of it, but I think one main thing is that it's not just the varied forms, but who different people can be victims and or abusers. That it's not always men, women. It's not always older, younger. It could be younger, older. And it could be men and women and women. It's so many different ways. And that's something that we're learning too. Because I think another one is, I think we talk about elder abuse, is that young people could abuse their grandparents or and whatnot. So I think it's the people involved as well. It's important to know that like it could be anyone.
I think it's so important, Congen, to also care about how your partner responds to you. When the partner starts recoiling or showing fear of you, in a healthy relationship, you can talk to each other, you can share things, you can be honest. There's no fear that you're going to be to be criticized because you are sharing how you feel about how the relationship is going. That's our goal, is for people who are involved with each other to have a sense of safety, to feel safe with whoever it is that they're with. Because that's what love is, after all. It's feeling safe in the company of somebody who takes care of you, who listens to you, and somebody who also wants you to do the same to him or her.
Mhm. In your experience in Alice, more or less, is it a pattern, or have you seen? Is it correct to say that those who are abused or victims, they have the tendency to be quiet, and if that is a correct observation, why do you think that they have a tendency to be quiet and not talk about the abuse that they suffer? And third question, and that a follow-up is, how do you help a person in that situation?
So do I understand that you're asking if there are people who are
Mm.
experiencing abuse but don't
Yeah,
seek
have you
help?
seen cases
Don't.
where the victims have the tendency to keep things to themselves and not talk about it, and not discuss it, and continue to suffer it over a period of time? And if that is a correct observation, why do you think they stay quiet about the abuse that they suffer?
So when we're talking about, is there a profile of somebody who is experiencing abuse? There's none. Because there are people who are so loud and so aggressive and so powerful and so successful in life who may be experiencing abuse at home, and yet who are not ready to come out and say, I am being abused. Why is that? Because there's shame. There's shame that, in spite of my success, I can't even have a happy relationship at home. There's that shame. There's fear. And so for people who are quiet, who are staying home and not socializing, who are experiencing abuse, they don't break their silence. They just suffer in silence because, again, the fear of what my partner might do if he or she finds out am that I am sharing what's happening behind closed doors with somebody else. So, like people who in COVID-19, for example, people are stuck at home, and they can't get the kind of even emotional support that they need. So then they just keep quiet or they turn to drugs. So yes, it does happen because there's fear, there's shame, and out of love. The people who are the survivors who um, who are successful but keep quiet, or the survivors who are silent but keep quiet, they love their partners, and so they want to believe that their partner will change over time and will learn healthier behavior. So there are many factors, and you're right. There, the question is, why do they stay with their survivors? There are barriers that stand in the way of their getting help and ultimately leaving their survivors if that is what they want to do.
Part of that too, I think, it's just lack of understanding of what violence, domestic violence is. And I think that's where again Alice comes in, to where we try to educate folks to know. And it's just that I think we're all sort of isolated. I mean, specifically those folks who are experiencing it are probably very isolated. Um, so that's how just becomes even more important. What Alice does is that we're constantly trying to reach out to folks, having these events, trying to reach the community. But we know it's very difficult. I came in thinking that was going to be my role, is to put us out there in the community, but it's hard. You know, the attendance of our events. You think it's a free event. We have food, we have raffles, and whatnot, but it's a difficult topic to talk about. So that's where I think us individually talking to family members, and then in turn, hopefully those family members will talk to someone else, will educate one another, and then having this kind of forum as well to even have this discussion. It's a hard topic to talk about.
Maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry.
no, Cherie, you mentioned now that we're in a pandemic, and you made mention of this, do you think that in the context of the pandemic, the potential for domestic violence and the abuse is higher, that as opposed to a non-pandemic situation? Do you think that's happening now in a more robust way? And if so, how can we help them? How can Alice be of help to them?
Definitely, Congen. There was a spike. Well, first, in the early days of the pandemic, there was a lag. There was a slowdown in calls to domestic violence hotline, and that is explained as survivors being with their perpetrators, and so they are unable to even use their cell phones to make those calls, or even go on their computers because they're being watched and controlled the whole time. And after that, there was a huge spike, depending on where you were, from 10% to 20%. Uh, Even shelters got a spike in calls, to the point where the United Nations Secretary General issued a statement saying that that survivors of domestic violence were suffering disproportionately at this time because they were trapped at home with their perpetrators. One of the reasons is the perpetrators might have lost their jobs, and so, or on furlough, and they're taking it out on the survivor, and the survivor also lost the job. So what's left for them to do? And then the courts, the survivor, for example, who wanted to take out a restraining order isn't able to do that because the courts were shut down or the offices. People were just scrambling for what to do. Now it's a more settled scenario. There are links now that are available. There are resources that we know about now that are taking in calls from people who need help. And again, that's the reason why Alice rushed to put together our updated A-list, was to make sure that the resources are current, that the contact information is current. And that's one way of making sure that that survivors know that there's a lifeline available to them. But we always say that they need a safety plan. They always need to be careful when they feel ready to seek help, is to try to just keep it under wraps. Have a safety plan, have a number to call, have a place to go, know where the children would be if they have children. So there are so many factors involved, and it's so complex a situation. And it takes more than an hour to talk about this, Congen, as you know.
Yes.
There is help available, and they're all coming out. And that's why, as a journalist, one of my concerns really is to write about all these resources that are available. So I thank the consulate for helping us get the word out. I thank media. I thank PositivelyFilipinoEnquirer.net, Philippine News Today for welcoming these articles that I asked them, that I pitched to them to publish, and to highlight so that people get the help that they need.
Well, leads me to the question, although I know you mentioned this already, but the fundamental question, why is it important for people to be aware? Why is it important for Alice to come out and make people aware that about domestic violence, that it's happening? Is it possible that a person could be doing that and yet be not conscious that he's doing something wrong? Is that a possibility?
Is that a possibility, that a person is being abusive and not knowing so?
Or both ways, that the person is committing abuse and think that what he's doing is right, and so here comes Alice telling us, these are the signs of what an abuse is, and so perhaps you have to do something about it. So I guess the question is, why is it so important for us uh, to make people learn, to educate, and bring this to the consciousness of the community?
There's a simple answer, Congen, is to make it a better world. I mean, if we are able to recognize the unhealthy, healthy from abusive behavior, then we can make changes in our own lives, in our own behaviors, and make our lives better. I mean, with our neighbors, with our partners, with everybody. One of the things that we do in our presentations, oftentimes we are invited to speak at events, for example, meetings, and this is pre-COVID. So we would be invited to do a presentation at organizations to talk about what are the signs for abusive behavior. And so we talk about myths about abuse. Okay, there are myths. There's a myth that abuse is an illness. Abusive behavior is an illness. Well, it's not. You don't take a pill and you'll stop being abusive. The Junior works in recovery, and excuse me, there is a belief that alcohol or drugs cause abuse. Well, we know that there's a correlation, right? But not everybody who drinks or smokes marijuana becomes abusive. Some people who engage or indulge in those in alcohol or drugs become more loving. So there's a correlation between drugs and alcohol because these substances lower inhibitions and heighten the need to be abusive. You want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, definitely the impact of domestic violence it's definitely impacts quality of life. And not just for that individual who's being victimized, but the people around them. If there's children or if there's parents or if there's other people involved. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's why it's important. And it's really easy to, I think we could kind of, just sweep things under the rug and make, have everything else okay, except for this one piece. But the impact of it, you may not see it right now, but the children who's in the house will be impacted in the future. So I think that's why it's important. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a topic that's hard to talk about, and would rather not talk about it, but it's impacting people's lives. So we need to talk about it.
There's a belief that it's a private matter, Congen, and you brought up, Junior, thank you, that it affects a lot of people, not just the two people who are involved. That if people think that it's a private matter, but if the intimate partners are not aware of the dynamics of abuse and where it can lead to, then they wouldn't be able to get help. They wouldn't be able to change the dynamics of their relationship. It would always be troubled. It would always cause depression and sadness in between them and the people around them. So we do know that children who witness abuse are twice likely to become either abusive partners or survivor partners. The child growing up might identify with the aggressive behavior, thinking that I don't want to be sad all the time. I don't want to be crying. I want to be strong. And so I will be like that, and ends up becoming like that, not realizing that it would lead to a cycle that the child's own offspring later on could follow in the same behavior. So, and then I always talk about physical violence, and which is only one of the many forms of abuse. If somebody is being beaten up and being threatened to be shot, and actually, if the perpetrator actually takes a gun and starts shooting, if you're standing by the window and wondering what's going on and you get shot, then you stand to get hurt as well. So injury is all around. So yeah, it's very important to understand these things, especially if you want to be living in a peaceful world because you are in charge of your own little private spot and your neighborhoods and your community.
Can you say therefore that domestic violence is cultural? Is it is it cultural? Is it is it true for any particular culture, or it's something that cuts across various cultures?
Good question. It does sound like that, right? Because there are certain cultures where women are supposed to stay indoors and not go out or not drink or not. Well, I can't. It's hard to to address that because that is the culture that is rooted in so many other factors. But we don't think that culture is huge, right? Culture shapes us, how we respond to things. But and that is why it's so important to learn what the dynamics of abusive relationships look like. Because you may have been brought up in a household where there is abusive behavior, but the country that you came from is is not which is not happening in the country that you came. Let's say we were in the United States, right? And we know that this is the land of freedom and democracy. And then, but we come from another country where women are supposed to be subservient to the men. So if we don't if we don't understand the dynamics of a healthy relationship, then we might not be able to survive this relationship.
Let's talk about the Filipino culture,
Okay.
because we know, we all love our culture, and it's a culture that we know is a very compassionate culture. But is it very possible that in that cultural milieu, how do I guess it's a one can safely assume because we are still human that abuse does exist. But in that milieu of culture, how does one, for example, perceive that an abuse is an abuse and not necessarily a cultural practice? How do you make that distinction? I guess the other question to that is does our culture breeds abuse, or if I kind of bluntly put it, or not, or in what sense does abuse exist in that cultural milieu? And finally, you mentioned clash of cultures when you say immigrants coming from a different culture, migrating, and therefore now immersed in a totally different culture. How do you now? I guess I'm complicating it more. How do you now perceive an abuse versus a cultural practice?
Corporal punishment, right? In the Philippines, so in the Philippines, you were doing it, right? And you immigrate here to the United States, and you do the same thing because it's sort of a norm.
Right.
But then your child goes to school and has a bruise, and CPS is calling you, and now that's you've been labeled as a child abuser. So I think in those terms, but I can't speak too much on intimate partner violence, domestic violence, because I don't know too much about that. But that's my parallel that I'm thinking about the clash in cultures. And I think that we've been talking about healthy relationships because we tend to talk more about domestic violence and whatnot, but that's definitely a topic that needs to be talked more about. What is a healthy relationship? Because that is our culture. I mean, I think I grew up in a culture where people were very respectful to one another, to elders. We have words of respect where a lot of other cultures don't. So yeah.
So wherever there's inequality, Congen, there's a potential for abuse. because then one will feel entitled to have power and control over the other, whatever the culture is. Where there is inequality, there is the high potential for abuse. But there are cultures, for example, like the Filipino culture, where there is a potential because it can be patriarchal, because the man of the house, how important it is, sits at the particular place. And there's also respect that Junior says. There is uh, devotion to family. So whether that person is the man of the house or the woman of the house or the youngest in the house or the eldest in the house, there is a sense of responsibility for each other. So it balances out. And to go back to what Junior said about corporal punishment, we in the United States, there are laws that that make it a crime for us to hurt anybody, to lift a finger on anybody. And so I think we need to be conscious of that as well. And there are other alternative forms of discipline if we're talking about corporal punishment as discipline. And that's one of the things that we need to learn about, because we are human beings and we can certainly adjust our behavior.
Mm.
If we know what the alternatives are. And that's why we are around, is to provide the alternatives to make life a little more pleasant, a little more beautiful to live.
Okay. And I guess you have to exist and people know how that you exist, so that people who are usually silent and quiet of their suffering would know where to go to, right?
Indeed.
And most often than not, people have the tendency to suffer in silence because maybe out of shame or fear of embarrassment, right? And I guess to make people feel that they're not alone. And so they have to know that there's an organization like ALLICE who is there to give them support. And talking about support, Junior, can you give us an idea, principally how ALLICE could be of help to people who are in that situation, suffering in silence and suffering domestic abuse? In fact, before you answer that question, maybe I'd like to, a prior question perhaps that I'd like to pose to you is, are there many cases really of domestic violence that has triggered some urgency for your organization to exist?
Most definitely. I mean, so my role, my day job is I work in substance abuse treatment. So within substance abuse treatment, and actually, luckily, we're actually working with a lot of Filipinos in Daly City. And along with substance use, there's usually a lot of stuff around domestic violence. So, I mean, aside from what you see in the news, I mean, I see it from, not daily, but like we definitely hear a lot of stories. So there's very much a need. And I think just how we could support and provide services, it's not so much that, but I think it's what's happening. Again, I'm going to talk about what's happening within ALLICE. This is something I think that's happened that's really beautiful, is that at the meetings that we have quarterly, is that they're supporting one another. These, strong, I mean, if you were to see them, they're like just this strong, smart women who I'm learning have been through their own domestic violence experiences. And a lot of them are just now beginning to talk and share. So even within our Comares Compares, we're, slowly talking about it. We had a Zoom session a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and it was people were sharing, and it was a difficult topic to talk about. And these are people who's supposed to be working in domestic violence, right? Or we're volunteering. But so imagine for regular people to talk about domestic violence, it's even more difficult. It's a very taboo topic, very difficult topic to talk about. So I think ALLICE exists to kind of provide that space, be it once or twice a year. but we exist online as well. That there's a place that people could go and talk to someone about domestic violence. So we're trying to reduce the stigma around domestic violence. So there's a lot of work happening. I mean, we may only have those 2 events, but I think almost day in, day out, something is happening. And really, the person that's doing a lot of this stuff is Cherie, and a lot of the other members as well. But yeah, I mean, and that's the reason I joined this group, because when I saw what they were doing, and also because it's my work, there's so much stigma in terms of like domestic violence, substance use, mental health, that we need organizations like ALLICE to go out there and create awareness and educate people and begin that dialogue and begin having that conversation.
Oh, okay. So I guess with that, you're not just concerned with those people who have been abused and therefore try to help, right? But you're also concerned about how to prevent that. So you're also on the preventive side on how to maintain a healthy relationship. And I remember at the beginning, there was a mention of relationship. So I suppose the idea is how to also make that relationship strong. Do you have a program on that as well?
Well, so prevention, education is prevention. So it's primary prevention, actually, what it is. So what we want to do is stop abuse before it happens. So if you are able to recognize the signs for abuse, then you may want to avoid having a relationship with that person who is trying to win your attention. Or you may want to take a closer look and find out, well, did I actually see that, or it's not really who this person is. So a consciousness or an awareness of what might constitute an abusive behavior. Sorry, that personality is different from behavior. And that's why we work very closely with our therapists, our psychologists in the group, to make sure that we are saying the correct things based on what they've learned. That is the program. And then, of course, when people come to us who are in need of direct service, which is one-on-one counseling, if they're in crisis, then we refer them to organizations that are really existing to provide that kind of service. And there are a lot. There's Cora in San Mateo, there's Casa de las Madres, there's in the Sacramento area, there's my sister's house, which is an executive director who's Filipino American. I think she's the only one I know in the area who's Filipino American who heads a direct service agency, which also has a shelter.
Okay, now since there's a mention of these services that you're providing, let's say a person who is undergoing some abuse, and how do they reach you? Maybe this is a good time for you to tell our viewers how they can contact you. Do you have a telephone number, a trunk line where people can, or an emergency number where they can reach you, or an email? Maybe you can tell our viewers what those contact numbers or email addresses that they can try to reach you through.
Right. Thank you for asking, Congen. But maybe I should express that ALLICE is not a direct service organization. We are an education organization. So we do have a website, and so it's www.allicecamares.com, and people can contact us there. We check, and we have what's called the A list. The A list is a directory of resource providers that we've vetted according to their competence in speaking Tagalog or any other Filipino language, whether they are open to serving people in the LGBT community, and also their cultural sensitivity. So we have about 65 of these organizations that they can call, and those are the organizations that have hotlines. Then there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline that people can call, and it's also on the ALLICE. And if you call that hotline, the person who picks up the call will direct you to the closest shelter, if that's what you need, or the closest agency for you. But the first thing that is to remember, if you are helping somebody, for example, if somebody came to me right now and told me that they are having trouble in their relationship, I would listen. I would listen. I would take on a certain tone of support and empathy. I would be compassionate. I would believe. I would not be in a hurry to say, do you want a number to call? I will wait until I hear that this person is looking for a resource provider that they can go to in case they want to find out what the options are available to them. Want to add anything, Junior?
Junior, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Cherie covered most of it, but one of the other things that we do is, I think you don't mention, is outreach. We do a lot of outreach. And we're actually doing a lot of these agencies a favor because we're reaching out to a community that may not be seeking services. Yeah, so we're like that bridge. Because a lot of folks sometimes they want to talk to somebody who mirrors them, who looks like them before they go out and seek services, because there may not be services that will have specifically Filipino staff. So I think that's another big plus that ALLICE provides, is that we're that bridge to services. Can I add on to the education and so I think it starts really within the group. So I think Cherie mentioned that the group consists of many different folks from different sectors, different fields, but we're very lucky that we have, I think, 4 clinicians. So within that, I mean, I think that Cherie or the founders have built a training program for the members. So I think it starts within, where we're getting trained and learning more about domestic violence of different types, different signs. And then we're able to go out and we have community events before COVID, like we go to ceremony, or we have a thing in National Night Out that would have happened. It wasn't for COVID. That the members would go out and table, and we're able to talk to community members and share what we do. So it starts from within, and then we go out, and we're also learning. I'm still learning about domestic violence and the different types. And like I said, in our meetings, a lot of us are still trying to grasp maybe domestic violence even within our own experiences, or how to deal with it within our own families, how to address if our sister or someone we care about is experiencing it. So it's a learning in many ways.
Can I add something?
Yes. Go ahead, Cherie.
So one of the things that we do is private. So we have what's called the Circle of Love, CONGEN, where somebody comes to us, whether it's Junior or myself, and expresses experiencing abuse at home, or doesn't know it's abuse, can't tell what's going on, but it's not good. I'm not happy. I'm afraid. I'm sad. I'm depressed. I don't know if I want to leave. I don't want to leave. I love my partner. We have children, etc., etc. So they come to us because they know that we're a member of this organization that's trained and that's helped a number of people. And so we tell them about the Circle of Love if they're willing to share their experience with us and to a group that would provide the kind of support, emotional support that they might need, to help them discern what's going on in their lives and see what the next best step for them. We actually did it for somebody a few months ago, correct? Mm-hmm. So it's something that happens outside of public view. But it's ongoing. As long as there's somebody that reaches out and gives us permission to come to us and hear her or him, because it happens to males also, then we do it.
Mhm.
And and what happens is there have been a few times when survivors um, who have come to our circle of love have offered to become kumaris too, and have moved on, and some have stayed.
Right.
So yeah.
You mentioned that you're doing this also via education, right? On the preventive aspect, telling people what signs to pay attention to before it gets into a full blown and escalate into an abuse, right? So going into that education, how do you normally conduct this education? How are you able to do this? Do you do this regularly or intermittently or and Junior, you mentioned about outreach. Maybe you can talk some more of your future programs, your future outreach programs. What's in store in the next few weeks or months? Cherie, you mentioned October. Perhaps you can tell us about what is special about October in terms of ALLICE.
Thank you for the segue, Congen. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And you know what? It just occurred to me that October is also the anniversary of the death, of the killing of Claire Joyce Temponco. It's been 20 years, can you imagine? 20 years that the two children that she left behind are missing their mother. And also her mother, Clara, um, who is who has become an advocate for healthier relationships. So every October, we stage an event that brings together resource providers. So we call it a resource provider fair. And then we have a survivor give testimony. And these events take place in partnership with other organizations that share our philosophy that the community is our responsibility. And so to make our community healthy, we need to embrace the responsibility as well. So ALLICE exists to bring together individuals and organizations to share resources. We don't go out fundraising. We don't ask for money. We ask people to share their time, their talent, their skills, their venues, to be a part of this whole alliance, this network of caring people and entities. And so twice a year we do that. Every October is intimate partnership relationship education that we do. And then every May, which is Elder Abuse Awareness Month in the United States, we have our Elder Care and Elder Abuse Prevention event, which is held in a faith-based setting. So that brings together we try to reach out to people of different backgrounds, whether they're Catholic or Episcopalian or Presbyterian. We would like to reach out to Buddhists and Muslims as well, because these are groups that look to the Almighty for help. And so that's an important thing for Filipinos because we are very religious. And so it's important to partner with our faith communities to share that education as well.
So last night, South Francisco made a proclamation for Domestic Violence Month, and again, recognizing ALLICE and the work that we
Hey! That's great.
But sorry.
and Cherie and Alan, our president, was there to accept the proclamation.
Hey, congratulations. Nice.
Thank
Well,
our
Councilman,
council member Flor Nicholas for
right,
making
right.
that.
And South San Francisco has been a huge partner as well in our outreach. I mean, we've done presentations there 5 times. And then on October 14, Colma is going to do the same for us. Colma is going to proclaim October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month and reminding people that there are resources available. we produced a video that shows the kumares and kumpares recognizing that life in COVID is more difficult for people who are in abusive relationships because then they're not able to reach out and get help because they are stranded at home, well, during the lockdown anyway, with their perpetrators. So Colma is showing that as well. I was also informed by uh, our county supervisor, David Canepa, that he would like to do a similar uh, presentation. So our pivot during this pandemic is to do little things instead of one big thing. And that way we also reach as wide uh, number of people as we can, especially with TANONG CONGEN, which crosses boundaries, right? Physical and geographic. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you for that. In fact, you're right. There are just too many issues, and one hour is not enough. And perhaps we can collaborate some more and have another forum that will take another look into this. Because as we speak, I'm sure that there is an abuser and there is an abused. There's a victim and there's the perpetrator, and both needs help. And I think people like ALLICE or organization like ALLICE, uh, uh, you're very relevant, and you have to be out there helping both, preventing it at the same time, and seeking possibilities or options for those who are victims. So we will definitely come back to this in another forum, and the consulate would be very happy to collaborate with Alice, who's always been a partner. Uh, but for people who wanted to help, uh, to also volunteer like you and Junior, and make themselves, their time, their effort available to people who need help. How can they volunteer and be part of Alice or in this advocacy?
Junior, tell them how you came on board.
Um, well, depending on what your resources are. I mean, luckily, I'm part of another organization that's doing similar work. And also, a lot of my work is around outreach, trying to engage people into services. So it's very similar. So we partnered with Alice a couple years ago. We provided some volunteers, some staffing, and also some food. So it begins with that, but it doesn't have to be at that level. I think a person comes in with a passion to help other people would be just as good. I mean, I think we need more people to kind of send a message out. It just so happens that I have some resources, but really I'm more here for myself, not so much my agency, and to be a part of this group of people.
Mm-hmm. Cherie, maybe you can tell them again the website. So for people who want to be part of Alice, and so they can communicate with you and make it possible for them to volunteer.
Yeah.
You can tell them again your website.
It's www.allice, kumares.com. www.allicekumares.com.
Okay, great. And a question, because we are also are seen in other parts of the world, are Filipinos outside of the United States, can they be part of Alice?
Why not? Oh,
Okay.
yeah. In fact, Congen, this is Renee. This is our uniform. We wear this every time we have a gala presentation, appearance. This is made by Renee Salud.
Mm.
So Renee Salud is a kumare. And then,
Okay.
right. And so I also gave a presentation at Centro Escolar University once. That was with Erlinda Gallion. We have Art of Gold, which is my sister-in-law's company that provides us with our table cover and our totes, our little giveaways. Anybody who wants to be a part of Alice can come and apply. They will just have to fill out a membership form because it's important for us to know who it is that wants to join us. And we want to make sure that that individual models healthy behavior, first of all. I mean, to educate about healthy interaction is to internalize it and model it first.
Mm, okay. Uh, there are still so many questions that we wanted to ask, and obviously, this issue is bigger than 1 hour, and definitely, I think we'll have to think of another time to further discuss this. But we've come to the point where we have to uh, you know, end this show. But before doing that, maybe I can ask you first, Cherie, and then Junior, what your final thoughts are, message that you want to share with people listening or watching us.
So thank you, Congen. Again, thank you for having us. As my friend Cecile Magsaysay used to say, nakakataba ng puso. That's the first time I heard that, nakakataba ng puso, that you would welcome us here, or we wouldn't have had the 16th Free from Violence because of the COVID pandemic. And so I believe that anybody, everybody can help stop domestic violence or abuse per se. Anybody who's willing to do it, anybody who's willing to learn. We do have therapists, and therapists share what they've learned, but everybody can learn just by listening, just by validating. Validating is saying, oo, nakikinig ako sa iyo, nadidinig kita, nakikita ko na nahihirapan ka, at tutulungan kita na maghanap ng tulong sa mga resources. So that empathy and that compassion is so important. And that is the first thing that a survivor wants to hear and wants to see in somebody who's willing to help. So anybody, basta makinig, maniwala, at mag-offer tumulong. Di ba, Junior?
Mm-hmm.
You want to say that in Ilocano?
Go ahead, Junior, your thoughts, your final thoughts.
No, so definitely. I mean, I think the main thing really is just being able to talk about it, and that's probably the hardest thing. But once we begin to have that dialogue and have conversations around domestic violence, and I think they'll just make it easier to kind of move forward. And then do know that there's services out there. There's organizations like ALLICE that exist, and I'm sure there's organizations that exist around you as well. It's just a matter of seeking it out. And the thing is, in our field, my field, really, a lot of times people will get services when things are already kind of, things gotten really bad. We're trying to prevent it from getting to that point to where it's so severe that police gets involved, hospitalization, and all those different things. But prevention is where, where education comes in, is you notice that things are going to that negative direction, and you're trying to prevent it from getting really worse. So definitely education and prevention is important.
Okay. Well, thank you, Junior, and thank you, Cherie. As I was listening to both of you and Junior, when you mentioned about conversation, I just remember at a certain point when I was talking about the South China Sea also, that you cannot solve a problem unless you recognize the problem. And you can only think of a solution when you do recognize that the problem exists. And sometimes the problem to the problem is you don't recognize the problem. And that makes the solution very impossible. And so I come to agree that perhaps one has to be open in terms of recognizing that the problem does exist. And when you start recognizing it, it starts a conversation. And when that conversation occurs, then that conversation will obviously include options for solving the problem. And that's true. And ALLICE is very helpful in terms of educating and providing that conversation, even on subjects that usually are taboo for us for various reasons, as Cherie mentioned. And so I think we we have to have platforms like these where those subjects need to be really discussed, and one must really take the courage to even engage in those taboo, what we refer to perhaps for some are considered taboo subjects, and that's a start really of learning and educating oneself. And we're very grateful to Alice. We're definitely most grateful to the two of you, Cherie and Junior, for sharing with us your thoughts and what Alice is all about. But I would like to perhaps end the session by focusing on what Cherie earlier mentioned. We can always discuss the negative things, but we should never forget the positive aspect or the affirmative aspect of things, which is to prevent it, which is love. I think for anybody who never went through an expert schooling on this, rely on that concept of love. When one is in love, then you will do anything to prevent and protect your loved one. And that should be the measure. So on that note, our gratitude again to Cherie and to Junior, and hopefully our kababayans would have gotten something out of this and build on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, CONGEN. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
And I will always say, Pinay ako, taas noo, Pinoy ako, proud ako.
Proud ako. Thank you.
Maraming beses na kitang nilayasan, iniwanan at ibang pinuntahan. Parang babaeng ang hirap talagang malimutan. Ikaw lamang ang aking laging pinabalikan. Manila, I keep coming back to Manila. Simply.
Our online celebration commemorates the 122nd anniversary of the proclamation of Philippine independence. I know, Dom, we are still in a pandemic and times are really tough right now, but that's not stopping us from celebrating our Filipino history, our culture, and our pride. And you know, tonight is the night to also honor the men and women who have really sacrificed so much amid the pandemic, our frontliners.
Hinahanap kita, Manila, ang ingay mong kay sarap sa tenga. Mga
Mabuhay!
naglilipa,
And all for a toast.
mga babae mong nagagandahan. Take me back in your arms, Manila, and promise me you'll never let go. Promise me you'll never let go. Manila, Manila, I keep coming back to Manila. Simply ain't no place like Manila. Manila, I'm coming home.
That was a phenomenal performance.
Good morning there in Manila.
Hi, Sir Henry. Kamusta po kayo? We are okay here, and we enjoyed the reception, and then we also want to congratulate you for your celebration of the 122nd Philippine Independence Day anniversary.
And promise me you'll never let go. Promise me you'll never.
Ryan Kayabyab and the Ryan Kayabyab Singers, thank you very much.
Now, to cap our program, we wish to leave you with a video prepared by the Philippine Consulate General in San Francisco to honor Filipino frontliners all over the world.
Mabuhay po kayo.
From the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much po, and have a good night or have a good morning. Thank you. Good night. Pinoy ako, proud ako.
makalimutan